The camera was rolling in a room that had seen 1,000 scenes before, but this time, the air felt heavy, like a storm was about to break. The air in that room was so thin you could practically hear Amy Slaton's heart shattering before she even hit the carpet. We have all seen the edited, polished version of 1000 LB Sisters, where every crisis has a commercial break and a resolution. But what happens when the cameras keep rolling on a mother's worst nightmare? What you are about to hear is the account of the footage TLC allegedly locked in a vault because it was too raw, too real, and too dangerous for the public to see. It is the moment Amy realized her fame might cost her the only thing she ever truly wanted. And the only person standing between the producers and Amy's total collapse was the one sister no one expected to step up. Amy Slaton sat in that familiar chair with her eyes looking right through the producers, as if she was seeing a future she could not survive. There was no upbeat music or witty sisterly banter to soften the blow this time. The silence in the room became so loud that you could hear the faint whirring of the camera lens, focusing on a woman whose life was about to shatter. Everyone present knew they were watching something that should never have been captured. It was the moment the mask of a reality star fell away to reveal a terrified mother facing the ultimate loss. What happened next would stay locked in a vault because the truth was too dark for a Tuesday nighttime slot. You probably remember the version of Amy that made it to your screen. She seemed a bit tired and maybe a little overwhelmed by the noise of motherhood and the pressure of the cameras. We saw her cry over small things and laugh off the big ones because that is the Amy the world fell in love with. But the version of Amy that the crew saw that day was someone entirely different. She was not just stressed out. She was spiritually and mentally depleted to a point where her hands were visibly shaking as she gripped the armrests of her chair. The show gave us a sanitized version of her life where everything could be fixed with a hug or a diet plan. The unedited reality was a woman spiraling into a place where she felt like she was failing the only people who truly mattered. The gap between the TV star we know and the woman in that room is wider than anyone ever suspected. The atmosphere on set shifted from professional to predatory within seconds. Usually, a production crew is like a well-oiled machine that ignores the drama to get the shot, but this day felt like a car crash in slow motion. Insiders claim the cameramen were looking at each other with genuine discomfort because they knew they were crossing a line. It stopped being about ratings and started being about a human being in a state of absolute crisis. You have to wonder what goes through a producer's head when they see a mother breaking down over the potential loss of her children. Do they see a soul in pain, or do they just see a high-stakes storyline for the season finale? The answer to that question might be the most disturbing part of this entire story. Amy was reportedly told that certain red flags in her personal life had moved beyond just being gossip. She was being confronted with the reality that if things did not change immediately, her right to raise her boys could be challenged. That was the specific trigger that changed everything. She did not scream or throw a fit like we see in the trailers for the show. Instead, she went completely pale and stopped breathing for a few terrifying seconds. It was as if her brain was trying to process a world where she was no longer a mother, and that world was simply too painful to inhabit. The look in her eyes during that silence is something the crew members say they still see when they close their eyes. The breakdown began as a whisper. Amy started saying that she had already lost everything once before, and she could not survive losing them too. It was a raw admission of a woman who felt like her entire identity was tied to being a mom, and without that, she was nothing. Then, without any warning, her body just gave out. She did not just cry, she crumpled. She slid out of that chair and onto the hard floor as if the weight of the news had physically crushed her spine. She curled into herself right there on the carpet, while the cameras kept recording every second of her agony. They did not stop filming even when she started begging for the cameras to be turned off. One production assistant allegedly tried to step forward to help, but was waved back by senior staff who wanted to see where the emotion went. This is the reality of the business that we do not see. Your worst day is their best content. Amy was on the floor clutching her chest and gasping for air, while people she considered friends stood around making sure the lighting was still correct. She was asking if she was a good mother, and if she had done enough to keep her family together. The desperation in her voice was so intense that it made the veteran crew members feel physically ill. It was the first time in the history of the show that the people behind the cameras felt like they were participating in a crime. If you have watched Amy from the beginning, you know she wears her heart on her sleeve, but this was not the Amy we know. This was a woman who had reached her breaking point and then kept going. She was calling out her kids' names as if they were already gone, and it created a chilling echo in that small room. The people who saw the footage say it felt less like a reality show and more like a psychological horror movie. Everyone was waiting for someone to be the adult in the room and stop the cameras, but the red light stayed on. There is a reason this footage has never seen the light of day, and it has nothing to do with timing. What makes this so haunting is the choice that was made in that moment. The decision to keep the tape running while a woman experienced the most traumatic news of her life tells you everything you need to know about the industry. They were not protecting Amy, they were harvesting her pain. The question remains about what exactly was said to her before she hit the floor and why the network felt they had the right to own that moment. The true catalyst for her collapse is still hidden in the layers of a legal battle that is only just beginning to surface. Would you be able to trust anyone again if they filmed you at your absolute lowest point and then debated whether or not to sell it to the highest bidder? Amy reportedly felt like she was being watched by vultures rather than friends. This was not just a bad day at work. This was the day the line between her real life and her TV character was erased forever. The psychological impact of knowing that her breakdown was recorded and archived is something that she still carries with her every time she steps in front of a lens. But the most shocking part is who walked through that door next and what they did to stop the madness. To understand why Amy hit the floor, you have to look at the invisible cracks that had been forming long before that day in the chair. It was not just one bad moment, but a series of behavioral patterns that allegedly signaled a mother at her absolute limit. Insiders whisper that the messy house and the constant crying on camera were not just for show, but were signs of a deep-seated struggle with postpartum depression and bipolar disorder that the cameras only made worse. The unthinkable conversation about her kids did not come out of nowhere. It was the result of months of concerns regarding her ability to maintain a safe environment while living under the microscope of a production schedule that never sleeps. The lifestyle that gave her everything was slowly becoming the very thing that could take it all away. The legal shadow over Amy's life grew darker every time a director called for another take. People do not realize how intense a reality TV schedule can be, especially when you are trying to raise two toddlers without a consistent support system. Sources claim that the pressure to deliver good TV often clashed with the basic requirements of parenting. If the kids were crying or the house was in chaos, the cameras kept rolling, because that is what the audience wants to see. But those same moments captured for our entertainment were reportedly being looked at by legal eyes as evidence of a mother who was failing to cope. It is a cruel irony that the more vulnerable Amy became for the ratings, the more she was allegedly putting her custody at risk. She was playing a game where the prize was fame, but the stakes were her own children. The psychological shift in Amy was like watching a light go out in a room. We were all used to the funny Amy, who made jokes about her weight and her quirks, but that woman disappeared the moment she realized her kids were on the line. She became paralyzed by the fear that every move she made was being documented as a failure. Imagine the mental toll of knowing that if you lose your temper or forget a doctor's appointment, it is not just a private mistake, but a permanent record for a judge to see. She stopped being a participant in her own life and started acting like a prisoner in a reality she could no longer control. The fear of being a bad mother on a national scale is a weight no amount of surgery could ever lift. There is a sequence in that lost footage that defines the word agony. As Amy is on the ground, she starts hyperventilating and reaches out toward the nearest lens with a hand that is shaking so hard she can barely point. She is not just crying, she is screaming at them to turn it off. She is begging for a shred of privacy in a moment that feels like her soul is being ripped out. Her voice cracks as she asks if they are happy now that they have finally broken her. The high intensity of that scene is almost impossible to watch because you can see the exact second she realizes that these people are not her family. They are her owners. The silence that followed her plea was the coldest thing anyone in that room had ever experienced. As she sat there on the carpet, she reportedly started listing off all the things she had done wrong, as if she was already testifying against herself. She was questioning if she was even allowed to be happy, or if the show had stolen her chance at a normal life. This was the moment the funny sister persona died for good. She was no longer looking for a laugh or a viral moment. She was looking for a way out of a contract that felt like a cage. The crew reportedly watched in total silence as she whispered her children's names over and over like a prayer. The line between a TV show and a tragedy had been crossed, and there was no going back. Would you be able to stay in a room where people were filming your mental collapse? Amy's desperation in that moment was a cry for help that went unanswered by the red light of the camera. The producers allegedly debated whether her breakdown was too real for the brand of the show, which tells you everything about where their loyalty lies. They were not worried about her health as much as they were worried about the optics of airing a mother losing her mind over her kids. It was a cold, calculated look at a human life as a series of data points. The footage remains hidden because it exposes the industry's darkest secret. What few people know is that this breakdown allegedly led to a massive standoff behind the scenes. Amy was reportedly refusing to get up until she was promised that the footage would be destroyed. She was terrified that if it leaked, it would be the final nail in the coffin for her custody case. The tension in the room was thick with the realization that they had pushed her too far. It was no longer about a weight loss journey. It was a survival journey. The next few minutes would determine if the show would continue or if the Slaton family would finally walk away from the lights. The irony is that while the public saw Amy struggling with her weight, she was actually struggling with her worth. She felt like she had sold her privacy for a paycheck, and now that paycheck was costing her the boys. The hidden footage shows a woman who realized the bargain she made was a mistake. She was mourning a life she hadn't even lost yet, and the cameras caught every single tear. The psychological damage of that day changed her behavior, forever making her guarded and fearful. But just when it seemed like she would be left alone in her pain, an unexpected protector walked through the door. When the room was at its coldest and Amy was still on the floor, the door swung open and Tammy Slaton walked in. For years, the narrative of the show was that Amy was the stable sister, while Tammy was the one who needed a keeper. But in this unedited moment, the roles flipped in a way that would leave the crew stunned. Tammy did not look for a camera or wait for a cue. She saw her sister broken on the carpet, and she did not see a scene, she saw a human being who had been pushed past the edge. Insiders say Tammy immediately turned on the production staff with a look of pure fury. She reportedly asked them point blank if they wanted to watch Amy die on camera too. It was a rare moment where the Queen Tammy persona was replaced by a fiercely protective sibling who was done playing the game. Tammy was the only person in the room who realized that the red light was not worth a life. The fallout from that confrontation was a frantic effort in the edit room to make sure none of that raw energy reached the public. The season we saw was a sanitized version designed to protect the network from legal liability. Sources claim that editors were given a mandate to frame Amy's breakdown as simple exhaustion or the standard stress of a divorce. They reportedly stripped away any mention of the custody threats or the specific legal warnings that had actually triggered her collapse. By doing this, the show managed to keep the ratings high without having to answer for the ethical disaster that had occurred behind the scenes. They turned a genuine mental health crisis into a relatable storyline about a busy mom who just needed a break. The real story was buried deep under layers of upbeat music and carefully chosen sound bites. This is the hidden power dynamic of reality television, where your trauma is treated as the network's intellectual property. Once you sign that contract, they own your tears and your fears, and they get to decide how the world sees them. In this case, the network reportedly treated Amy's collapse like a high-value asset that was too dangerous to use. They knew that if the public saw the full extent of her distress, and the crew's refusal to stop filming, the backlash would be catastrophic. So they locked the footage away and pretended it never happened, while Amy was left to deal with the psychological scars on her own. They kept the profit but left her with the pain. If you were paying close attention to Amy's social media during that time, you probably noticed the subtle red flags that the show tried to hide. Her posts became cryptic, and the light in her eyes seemed to have flickered out. She was sharing photos of her boys, but her captions were filled with a desperate need to prove she was a good mother. Fans were commenting about how she looked hollow and exhausted, and now we know why. She was living in a state of constant hypervigilance because she knew there was a tape out there that could be used against her at any moment. Every smile she posted was a shield against a truth she was not allowed to tell. The disconnect between the happy show and the broken star became impossible to ignore for those who knew where to look. Amy started withdrawing from public life, and the fun, spontaneous videos that made her famous were replaced by obligatory updates that felt rehearsed. She was allegedly terrified that the footage would leak and reveal her at her weakest point, which she feared would be the final blow to her custody case. The silence from the network only made her more paranoid, as she felt like she was being watched by a partner she could no longer trust. The ghost of that unaired day was haunting every single move she made. Would you be able to keep working for a company that watched you crumble and then calculated the cost of your breakdown? Amy's relationship with the show became purely transactional from that point on. She allegedly told friends that she felt like a product rather than a person. The sense of violation she felt after being filmed on the floor was a wound that no amount of editing could heal. She was performing for a paycheck while her heart was in a legal battle that the audience was never supposed to fully understand. The show went on, but the sisterhood that started it all was fundamentally broken. What we see on TV is only ever a fraction of the reality, and the part they leave out is often the most important. The sanitized season allowed viewers to judge Amy for being messy or emotional without knowing the true stakes she was facing. It is easy to comment on someone's parenting when you do not see the pressure of a camera crew documenting your every mistake for a legal file. The editing room is where they manufacture heroes and villains, but they often forget that they are dealing with real people who have to live with the consequences after the cameras go dark. The truth about that day reveals a system that is designed to exploit the very people it claims to celebrate. As the season wrapped up, the tension behind the scenes reached a boiling point. Tammy was reportedly still at odds with the producers over how they had handled Amy's crisis. She was no longer willing to be the difficult sister for the sake of a plot point when she had seen the real difficulty Amy was enduring. This shift in the family dynamic created a ripple effect that changed the entire tone of the production. The Slaton family was starting to realize that the show was not their friend, and the cost of the spotlight was becoming too high to pay. But the most chilling realization was still to come as the legal battle moved from the set to the courtroom. The trust that once existed between Amy and the production crew did not just crack, it completely disintegrated. Before that day, Amy saw the crew as friends who were helping her tell her story, but after the cameras stayed on during her collapse, she saw them as debt collectors coming for her soul. She realized that the people nodding behind the monitors were not there to support her journey, they were there to inventory her tragedy. This shift changed everything about how she walked onto a set. She stopped sharing her inner thoughts and started giving them only what was required by her contract. She moved from being a partner in a creative process to a product being managed for a profit margin. Every time she saw a lens, she no longer saw a platform, but a weapon being pointed at her family. The long-term toll of that hidden day manifested as a state of constant hypervigilance that made her life feel like a prison. When filming resumed, Amy was reportedly checking the corners of rooms for microphones even when the crew was not there. She became obsessed with the idea that her home was no longer a sanctuary, but a set where every mistake was being logged. This led to a deep sense of isolation as she began to pull away from everyone except her immediate family. She allegedly stopped inviting friends over and limited her outings because she was terrified of being seen in a moment that could be misinterpreted by the public or the courts. She was a woman living in a shadow cast by a piece of footage she was never allowed to see. The ethics of reality television often get lost in the pursuit of the next big viral moment, but Amy's story is a sobering reminder of the human cost. When you document vulnerable people who are struggling with mental health and massive life changes, you are not just filming a show, you are playing with fire. The industry thrives on pushing people to their breaking point because stability does not get ratings. But what happens to the person after the season ends and the audience moves on to the next drama? Amy was left to rebuild her life with the knowledge that her most humiliating moment was sitting in a digital vault owned by a corporation. The fame she worked so hard to achieve had become the very thing preventing her from finding peace. This brings us to the lingering ghost of that unaired footage which continues to haunt the production of the show to this day. Insiders claim that the atmosphere on set never truly recovered from the Amy incident. It forced a reckoning within the network about how much they could legally and morally extract from their stars. While they kept the footage locked away to avoid a scandal, its existence changed the way the Slaton family interacted with the world. They became more guarded and more aware of the transactional nature of their fame. The ghost of that day is the reason the show feels different now, and why the humor feels a little more forced than it used to. The truth is that you cannot film a soul-breaking and expect things to go back to normal. The final payoff of this hidden chapter is the realization that the version of reality we see is a carefully constructed lie. We watch for the weight loss and the laughs, but the real story is the one they refuse to show us. It is the story of a mother who almost lost it all while the world watched her for entertainment. Amy Slaton is still standing, but she is not the same woman who started this journey years ago. She has learned the hard way that when the cameras turn off, the consequences of being real are yours alone to carry. The Ghost in the Archive is a testament to the price of admission in the world of reality TV. It is a price that Amy paid in full while the red light stayed on. The emotional reckoning that followed that day eventually forced the show to shift its focus, but the scars remain visible in every guarded smile Amy gives the camera. She proved that even in a world where everything is for sale, there are some things that should remain sacred. Her children are still her world, and her fight to protect them from the fallout of her fame is the most real thing she has ever done. As we look forward to what comes next for the Slaton family, we have to ask ourselves what our role is as viewers in this cycle of exploitation. Because while the footage remains hidden, the impact of that day is written all over Amy's face every time the director yells action. If you think this was the only time the cameras captured something they should have deleted, you are in for a shock, because the drama with the Slaton family is only one piece of the puzzle. There is another family in the TLC universe whose hidden legal battles make this look like a walk in the park. How did a simple trip to a petting zoo lead to a full-scale police investigation and the potential end of another reality TV legacy?